Y'all good? Think so? Take a deep breath. Let it out. We're going to do some yoga in just a second. It'll all be good. Hey, so this week we start a series entitled Follow Me, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due. This series originated with my friends at North Point in Atlanta. And so during it's about 8 weeks long, so if you, over the next several weeks, you have an opportunity to miss one of the messages, you can go back and see it online. But I want to give credit where credit's due and say that I've kind of taken this and made it my own. So if there's anything that's good in it, probably need to give credit to Andy Stanley and the folks at North Point. And if there's anything that's stupid in it, you should say, that's Andrews. We don't have to pay attention to that so much. But the whole point of this series is this, and is that nobody really explicates very well what it means, like how you come on board with following Jesus. I have to say that in my Christian walk, somehow along the way, it seemed to me that there was always several people who knew what I should do, but none of those several people's paths agreed. And so one person would be pointing this way, and another person would be pointing that way, and some other people would be pointing this way, and it was confusing to me. And so one of the things that I gravitated toward this series about, and it's one of the things that I've rolled around in my mind for a while, is like, really, what's the baseline of this whole following Jesus? Like, how do you get there? Where does it start? What do you do? And so whether you've been following Jesus for a long time, we're going to start today with this notion of talking around Jesus says. And whether you hadn't been following Jesus at all and you're thinking about it, then we're going to work around this notion of what Jesus really says. Like, what does Jesus say about this following him? And so today we're going to begin to talk about that. And again, for the next 8 weeks, we're going to go over it. It'll be the series that never ends. If you got a Bible with you, and if it rings, I would love for you to turn it off for a second. The ringer, that is, not the Bible. And then if you got a regular one that's got pages, because God ordained paper and books and leather, and it's fantastic. If you got us the regular book, we're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9. Should be on the screen for you as well. And then we're going to begin our time together this morning here, because at the end of the day, we're going to pick up with one of the disciples that really I think is the baseline for coming on and picking up this journey that Jesus invites us on. And so we pick it up in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. It says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he got up and followed him. Now, if you've been around the church for a long time, that verse, like, you know that, right? And let's just be honest about it, though, is my journey and probably your journey when Jesus walks by isn't that easy. Like, Matthew doesn't put up much of a fight in this, does he? And so he's the kind of guy that has every reason in the world's eyes to not accept this invitation to follow Jesus. As Laura pointed out to us this morning, even in the text, he's sitting in a tax booth. He's a tax collector. So let me do just a little bit of work, because those of you who've been around the church know the reputation of tax collectors. And those of you who might not have been around the church much might just think, well, they're tax collectors. So there's a certain House of Representatives delegate in Washington, D.C. right now from the state of California that many of you know and despise. That you can't stand. And there's a certain delegate from, I don't know, pick your other state, and it might be here, might be of the other political persuasion, that comes on TV every other night and produces something that you can't stand. That you just look at, and it makes your face want to melt when you see them. You just, when you look at them, you just cannot stand it. Or, you remember there's this guy, he's holed up. I think he's in a consulate somewhere. His name is Snowden. He stole a bunch of secrets. Okay? If you look around, generally speaking, in the United States, he's not on everybody's Christmas card list. In fact, he can't even come back here. And if he did, it would be a beating like nothing nobody has ever seen. We can all agree with that. So what's he talking about? I'm trying to give you a picture of the public's general mindset of a tax collector. What you think of the House of Representatives person is generally what people thought of tax collectors. I was going across the highway in Alligator Alley in January in Florida, and I ran across a tax booth. And so I happened to think, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. It's $1.25. And there's a sign, which is a different sermon for a different day. There's a sign on the tax booth that says, please stay in your car. And I asked myself, I said, self, who got out of the car to pay a toll? Because you just roll the window down and throw it in, right? Except when you're like me and you don't have the $1.25. And then I guess you got to get out and negotiate with the tax lady in the booth. So I had some sweet tarts, and I thought, well, maybe I can throw those in there. And luckily, my aunt had put $1.25 in the console, and I happened to find it in a panic and throw it in. But imagine what you would do if you went to a place like that and you didn't have any money, and you couldn't get out, and you didn't have. So this is the kind of guy, Matthew, that when you came up to the tax booth, you had to pay your particular taxes to the kingdom. And he's more hated because he's supposed to be on the home team. He's supposed to be like us. He's supposed to be in our corner, in our favor. And he's not. And in fact, if you didn't have the money in hand to make the tax payment, he'd just say, well, what else you got? What you got in that bag? I got my car keys. I'll take those. Who are these people traveling with you? I might take those. What else you got? I mean, they would take anything they had to get. They would extort, because they had bought rights to collect taxes. They would extort whatever they felt like was equal if you didn't have the money necessary to go, or they'd just turn you away. So this is the kind of guy Jesus has walked up to and looks at him and goes, follow me. And I say to myself, you know what? Thank God for Jesus, because I don't feel half as bad as Matthew sounds. You know? I mean, so if he would invite a fellow like that, what would he do for somebody like me? And even more importantly than that, here's what other thing I want to just put in front of you before we move on from this, is that this is attributed, this letter, this writing, this gospel is attributed to the same person that we're looking at right now. So you think about when he penned this out, what's going through his mind whenever he recalled the day that Jesus walked up to his little booth, and he looks at Jesus and goes, okay, what can I get out of this guy? How much, I wonder if he's got any tax money. And then Jesus turns the tables over on him and says, hey, follow me. So this is the hand that's writing this out as we look at it this morning. You think about, he just got up and followed Jesus. Can it really be that easy? I mean, can it really be that easy? That when Jesus walks by, he issues an invitation, and you just get up and follow him. Because let's be honest, isn't it some of the perks of living the life that you and I live, that like Matthew, that we have all this great stuff and we got this whole system wired up? Isn't it some of the perks that when Jesus comes by and says, follow me, isn't it some of those perks that go, how about we talk later next week? Isn't it some of those perks that, isn't it some of our lifestyle that we're, I mean, it's really a fear that we have, because we might have to do something different than what we've always done. But Matthew, for whatever reason, saw it for what it was and got up and followed Jesus. And then in verse 10, look at what he says. He says, and as he sat at a dinner in the house. How did we get from the tax collector booth to a dinner at the house? So Jesus has gone on to a dinner, and it says in the New American Standard, which it kind of helps us get in it. And then it happened that Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, in Matthew's house. And behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus. So not only does Matthew have an encounter with Jesus, and he just responds, something connects when Jesus comes by, but he invites Jesus to his house. And in the ancient world, this is kind of like what we do, right? Nothing says Jesus like pecan pie. Maybe you say it's chocolate chip cookies or a good steak dinner or whatever the case is. The point is that Matthew is ratifying with Jesus the thing, like he's agreeing in principle to this whole follow me thing, even though he might not, I would allege, does not know what he's agreeing to. And so they sit down at a meal together, and for lack of a better way to describe it, they talk a little bit about the details, you would think. Like Jesus has signed Matthew up, Matthew signed up with Jesus, and now we're going to find out about the deal. But even beyond that, many tax collectors and sinners show up. And this is it's just a beautiful thing about Matthew. I'm going to lean in on this one for just a second. Is Matthew has this whole house full of things that he's extorted from everybody, and Jesus is sitting at a table in the middle of it. Let that sink in for a minute. And not only that, is Jesus in the middle of a whole group of people whose thugs, extortioners, robbers have sat around a table with the Savior of the world. Isn't that magnificent? I think it is, because here's why. Let's just bang around in Matthew's head for a minute. Why isn't it, isn't it true most of us, when we come to follow Jesus, we have people that we're in relationship with that maybe they might not warm up to this Jesus guy like we do. And in fact, when we look around and Jesus radically alters our life, he introduces us into a new thing, isn't it true that sometimes we're in relationship with people that we look around and go, I mean, really? But think about what Matthew does. Think about the first thing Matthew comes with in his mind is to call all his tax collector buddies together and bring them to a party at his house with this guy he ran into at the tax booth and looked him in the face and said, hey, follow me. Now let's bang around in his mind. Think about what Matthew does. Now, I don't know this, and it doesn't say it in the text. I mean, come on, you got to use your sanctified imagination here just a little bit. But think about what he does. What if it's for just a second that Matthew secretly sitting at the table, and he continues to wonder the same thing that most people wonder? Why would Jesus invite a guy like me with my reputation and my lifestyle? Why would he invite me to follow him? Maybe he looks around, and I don't know this. Maybe Matthew, as he recognizes that something inside of him has flipped, that he's made some connection that he doesn't understand, or maybe he realizes that maybe I have some things, some real intrinsic, some inherent qualities that are more valuable than what I can just produce in the world. Maybe he recognizes that when he went back and told his buddies, he said, hey, you got to meet this guy that I met. Maybe he's just got this ability to connect with all these people. And I wonder if Matthew's sitting at the table and he's thinking, I wonder if this is why Jesus invited me. Like, I got this whole group of friends, miscreants, basically rabble-rousers, and Jesus, maybe I can do. Maybe there is something good in me. Or I wonder if he's just really compassionate, Matthew, that is. I wonder if Matthew, when he had this interaction with Jesus standing in the middle of the road, I wonder if something just went off in his heart and he just began to melt. And then you got this big, burly, tax-collecting, tough dude who basically is cheat, steal, rob, taking the Savior of the world back to his house to have dinner in the midst of all his stolen loot in the room. And I wonder if Matthew's heart began to melt, and it wasn't so much conviction of, oh no, what am I, but oh no, where are they? I wonder if Matthew ran into this and he recognized that this heart of stone he thought he had cultivated to do the work that he had invited himself to do in the world. I wonder if it melted away and he found himself eyeball to eyeball with the fact that, wow, I want my friends to feel like what I felt when he looked at me in the middle of the road and said, follow me. Now, I don't know any of that, but here's the thing I don't want you to get past is that Jesus is in the house, as I've said 3 times already. Jesus is in the house with people who are absolutely nothing like him. And does it occur to you from the text that he's bothered by that? That the text says they're sitting around the table. They're sitting around the table with many tax collectors and sinners having a party. Now imagine Jesus is hamming it up, chopping it up. They're telling jokes that are probably off color. They're talking about stuff that they probably don't have any business talking about because they really don't know who this Jesus guy is. They're probably talking about how great Alabama football is. Just want to make sure you're still with me. I knew that one would get it. I mean, really, he's probably in a room where nobody is like him. And does it occur to anybody from the text that bothers Jesus? And here's the thing I don't want you to miss out of this verse, is that Jesus is extraordinarily comfortable around people who are nothing like him. And people who are nothing like Jesus were extraordinarily comfortable around Jesus. Follow me. And the first thing Matthew does is bring people who are nothing like Jesus into his midst. And I almost want to stop there, but you're not that lucky. And so in verse 11 he says, and when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why do your teacher eat with sinners and tax collectors? So, again, you have to use your sanctified imagination a little bit, right? So you imagine, I don't know how many disciples are traveling with Jesus at this point. If you follow Matthew's gospel, he doesn't really make it clear. But let's just say, for the fun of it, let's just say all of them are there. Let's just say 8 of them, whatever you want to say. But whatever the case is, think about the scene. They're having this humongous dinner party on the inside with people that they are nothing like. And the disciples are on the outside, and I got to think this is how it goes. And again, it's not in the text, and you might not believe it, and that's okay. But here's the deal. I got to think they're on the outside of the house, and they're looking in with Jesus, and they're out there grumbling and griping and complaining about, what is he doing? Like, this is the same guy he has invited Benedict Arnold onto our team. He has an absolute traitor in our midst. What in the... it's serious. It is game time now because he has got a sure enough, not a rascal, but another word that I'm sure there's a Hebrew word for that when you translate it into English, it sounds a lot like a cuss word. It is not a good thing that he has put us on the team with this guy who extorts stuff from our people. What is he doing? I thought he said he's supposed to teach us how to follow him and love each other and know other people and know God. What is going on here? Because he's in the room with people who are nothing like us and nothing like him. What is going on? And then it happens, right? And then it happens that the Pharisees show up. This isn't good in the Bible. Anytime the Pharisees show up in the Gospels, that should send off flags for you. You should look at it and go, it's about to get good. Because it's about to get good. And they ask this question, right? Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Other words, the ultra-religious people show up to the party. They get wind that there's a big ruckus going on at the thug's house down the block from them, right? They walk past his house every day going to synagogue probably, and they never thought to invite him or talk to him about anything. But let's just put that one aside for a minute and just say they hear there's a big ruckus going on down there, and then they got to go check it out. And they run up on the disciples, and the first thing they do is ask the disciples, like, what is going on here? And the disciples have one of those Scooby-Doo moments, right? Oh, ruh-roh, Reggie. Tell us, what is this guy you're following actually doing? Ruh-roh. Have anybody ever come to you and ask you about what Jesus is doing and really just stunned you with the question? That's what's going on here. Like, it's not that they can't get it. It's just they don't have an answer for it. And this is the whole point, He said, I want you to, and you can't see it in the text, but think about, this is why you have to dream a little bit and use your imagination. You got these people that are nothing like Jesus in a room with Jesus having a good time and a good party, and Jesus is in there with them, and the people who are on the outward side look pretty much like Jesus, sort of like Jesus, maybe more like Jesus than Jesus looked like Jesus, are on the outside of the room where Jesus is. They're on the outside of where Jesus is. The very people who thought they knew Jesus the best, who thought they understood everything they needed to know about this whole Jesus character, are in proximity to the Savior of the world, but they're not in his presence. That just seems strange to me. And so their question still stands, though. Why does Jesus keep company with those who are the most offensive to the most people? It's a shame that nobody can answer that, though, isn't it? But I don't know whether the case is, but at this point, I don't think anybody really knows that Jesus is the most enigmatic lover of people that the world has ever seen. And that when he issues an invitation to follow him, it defies every set of standards ever in any relationship that anybody has ever been in. In other words, all the people who thought they had it together seem to be focused on the fact that this group of Jesus is in a room with this group of people who don't believe the right things and don't behave the right way. And the people who believe the right things and behave the right way aren't in Jesus' very presence. And so we have this tension in the text between these two groups of people. And here's the thing that I don't want you to miss today, is that this invitation to follow Jesus is more than a game of Jesus says. It's not about what Jesus says do this and Jesus says don't do that. It's more than that. And the people who believe the right things and behave the right ways are on the outside of the room with the people who don't believe the right things and surely don't behave the right way. But Jesus is sitting at the table with them. Isn't that odd? Nobody ever told me when I started to follow Jesus that that could be the case. That I could go back and engage with people that I thought I had to leave when I said yes to Jesus. That I thought I had to leave them because they didn't believe the right things and behave the right way. That nobody ever told me that, no, that's not the case. You can stay in community with them. But it's going to cause you some grief. You're going to have to work real hard because they're not going to understand when they tell off-color jokes and you go, really? They're not going to understand when you say everything has to be some political argument and they go, how about the Braves? What about the Braves? And they go, never mind, sorry. I mean, nobody ever told me that you could not go away from the people that God had given you community with, because what Matthew does and what Jesus exhibits for them is that you might be the only bridge back to Jesus. But you got to decide whether or not that means that you can only behave the right way and believe the right things before you can be in Jesus' presence, or if you can be in Jesus' presence without believing the right things or behaving the right way first. You got to decide. But it's more than a game of Jesus says. Look at what he says in verse 12. But when Jesus heard this argument going on between the Pharisees and the disciples, right, so it gives you the impression that they're close enough that even everybody can hear the discourse, the Scooby-Doo moment. They can all hear it. Jesus heard this, and he said to those, it's not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. Now, come on, we got to put our imaginations back on for a minute here. You see the parties go and the Pharisees show up. This sounds like a bad bar joke. I mean, if you think about it. Really. I know y'all can't. He said bar in church. Bar. Here it is. Here it is. This sounds like an awful thing. You have the makeshift Jesus followers, the thugs, criminals, and extortioners, the ultra-religious, and the Savior of the world all in the frame here. If that doesn't spell recipe for disaster, I don't know what does. And so you think about it all. There's this explosive thing going on outside, and Jesus overhears it, and they're going, you know, not to mention the fact that the people that are not at all like the religious or like Jesus, they hear it too. They hear what the religious people say about them. They've heard it more than they care to admit. And so I got to think a bunch of guys who get paid to collect money from people the hard way or the easy way, I got to think this is on the verge of a full-blown Pier 9 brawl, and it ain't going to work out good for the religious people. And Jesus says this thing that only Jesus can say, right? It's not the healthy that need a physician, but it's the sick. Now imagine yourself laying around the table with Jesus, and he shouts that out. Hey, go outside and you tell those people, the disciples, you come here. Tell the religious folks, and you hear this too. It's not those who are healthy who need a physician, but the sick. You imagine everybody sitting around the table. This is yay, go team Jesus. All of a sudden, they're looking over. And they start high-fiving. You go tell them that it's not the healthy people who need a physician. It's the sick people. And then all of a sudden, somebody sitting at the end of the table goes, yeah. Did you just call us sick? Comes back to reality, doesn't it? Did you just? And so the tension comes back into the room, and the question stands, did you just call us sick? And it's not in the text again, and I got to believe, though, that Jesus, if it were in the text, this is what Jesus would say, and you have to use your sanctified imagination, but here it is. I got to believe Jesus looked around, and when it was about to the point where they thought the pack was going to turn on him, he looked somebody in the eyes and goes, come on, you know you're sick. You know that you can't even obey your own rules, right? You know that this whole extortion thing, even though you won the rights to collect all that, you really know that that's not right, don't you? Like, you really know that if there's a God in the world, like I've talked about, you might not be on his team. You know, right? You know you're sick. And I bet that was the response in the room for a minute. And I bet that was the response on the outside of the room by some. Because the question has become all of a sudden, who is it that's sick? Not why does Jesus eat with tax collectors and sinners anymore. The question is, who's sick? He sort of leaves it hanging out there. Who is sick? But then he goes on. He goes on to say, well, anybody. And this is what I think he says. It's not in the text again. Anybody who recognizes there's got to be more to life than this life I'm living right now, they're a prime candidate to hear the invitation that Matthew heard. Hey, follow me? You won't follow me? But what does it mean to be sick? No. You won't follow me? But what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to behave? Come on. You follow me. So in his midst, he has turned the world upside down. And then he goes on in verse 13. He says, but go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous but the sinners. And so Jesus does what Jesus and only Jesus can do. He quotes the Old Testament. And he quotes a particular passage out of Hosea where the prophet was speaking to God's people. And in that effect, he says, well, you believe the right things and you behave the right ways, but it's only to coerce God into doing what you want God to do. And the prophet says, God does not respond to that. And so I think it's interesting that Jesus quotes a particular text to people who probably knew the text as well as he did. And they went, oh, okay. Maybe so. But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion, not sacrifice. So Jesus might have said it like this, and again, a rephrase. He might have said, I'm not content to be with people who simply believe the right things, and I'm not content to be with people who simply behave the right way. But I want to be with people who believe the right things and behave the right way so that we might engage with people who don't believe the right things and don't behave the right ways, and that they might be in community with all of us. Because I desire compassion, not sacrifice. I don't desire you to behave the right ways and believe the right things to the extent that your life is miserable. No, I desire you to be compassionate, that you do those things because you love me, because I love you. And the first way to know that is because I come by and ask you to follow me. But he says he did not come to call the righteous but the sinner. And so we'll wind it out this way this morning, is that I know a lot of you here, a long time ago, Jesus came by and asked you to follow him. I know that, and I'm grateful for that. But here's the thing, is that it's incumbent upon us to be careful that we don't become so ingrained in what we do and focusing on believing the right things and behaving the right ways that we find ourselves on the very outside of the space where Jesus might be. That could be the case. And it's easy to do, right? When following Jesus becomes about doing what Jesus says. Jesus says, don't go here. Jesus said, don't use them words. Jesus says, don't look at her. Jesus says, don't be Facebook friends with him. Jesus says all this stuff, right? And we can forget that it's about relationship, not rule keeping. And maybe, just maybe, somebody here today hadn't decided to follow Jesus so long, and that's cool too. Here's the thing that I want you to hear. Is that Jesus has no expectations of you. He has hopes for you. And the way to find out what those hopes are is by saying yes to the invitation to follow him. So he hadn't come by and issued me that invitation. Yeah, he has. And if he hasn't done it, let him do it this morning. It just happens to sound like me. If you want to follow Jesus, wherever you're sitting in your life, if you're sitting in whatever tax booth you've built up, and Jesus has walked up to the window, don't ask him for sweet tarts or 25 cents. He extends you the invitation to follow him. So the question is, will you get up and follow him? Because he has no expectations for you, but he has hopes for you. And if Jesus is calling you, the altar is a great place for us to do that. As we prepare to sing one more time this morning, I would encourage you, not for just your own sake, but for the sake of others. Because you're in community with people right now that their spiritual heritage depends on your ability to invite them and your willingness to invite them into the presence of Jesus. Just like Matthew. Just like Matthew. And it all hinges on them having the ability, the space, to see that Jesus is extraordinarily comfortable with people who are nothing like him. And every time that happens, people who are nothing like Jesus can contemplate if there's more to this life than this life they're living. And so, friends, however the Lord invites you this morning to do business with him, I encourage you to do that. Whether it's in the seat and you have to figure out what group of friends you're supposed to invite into proximity with you so Jesus might be able to be in their presence some. Whether it's an opportunity to hear him issue the invitation and you to do that, to accept that, that's the case. You may do that this morning as well. Whatever it is, be sensitive to what it is God is inviting you to do this morning as we sing together.